To order. It's after 11. It's a special joint meeting of both committees. I would ask the clerk to call the roll.
Steve Arnold, Dave Bushy, Mike Bradley, Al Broad, Andy Brusewitz, Todd Case, Doug Cook, Peter Gilliland, Anne-Marie Gillis, Bev Hand, Bev McDougall, Kevin Marriott, John McCharles, Don McGugan, Lonnie Napper, Ian Veen, and Bill Weber.
Present.
We have a quorum present.
Thank you. I guess I'd ask if anyone has a pecuniary interest to declare it. And I would call for a motion. I don't see any pecuniary interest. I call for a motion to allow the delegations to come within the bar. Mayor Case and Councillor Arnold. All in favor of that? That's carried. Thank you. First off, we have Jeff Hogan, Executive Director of Southwest Integrated Fiber Technology, SWIFT. Jeff, if you could come up and if you have your presentation ready, welcome.
All right. Whoa, that's very low. Okay, that's better. Thank you, Warden Weaver and members of County Council. As I was introduced, I'm Jeff Hogan, the Executive Director of SWIFT, and I'm here to bring you a quick update and some clarifications on some questions that some of your staff have had and some of the other councils that I've been presenting to have had as well. And I'll keep it as short as I can and open up for questions afterwards. Thank you. So since the last time we were here, we've had a great funding announcement that we now have $180 million of federal and provincial funding on top of the $18 million that our municipal partners are going to provide to make a total project cost of $288 million in our region, which is a really large, it sounds like a major amount of money, but when you think about it, it's a $4 billion problem to connect everyone in southwestern Ontario. So $300 million is a great start, and we're going to get a lot of things accomplished and started, but we all still need to keep the pressure on our federal government to keep these funding programs coming so that we can actually get the job finished. So that's a message. So what is SWIFT funding with our $288 million? We're going to build a fiber optic network and connect people, places, and things. And one of the reasons we're only fiber optics is because we want to spend money on a long-term resource that is scalable and able to meet the needs of the future. So we don't want to spend any money on any technologies that doesn't have a long shelf life with our public sector funds. So we will spend money on our network, which is the bottom box. We'll connect to the base of a tower to improve wireless services in the short term. We'll connect to homes, businesses, cabinets, and nodes. And this is just the way that the providers currently provide services through their copper cables. They connect it to a point with fiber, and then they do the rest with copper. We will only fund up to the end of the fiber, and after that, the providers will be on their own because we only want to spend money on scalable fiber optics. Well, about the fiber optics that SWIFT is going to fund that is owned and operated by the providers, if we fund a provider, we are going to demand that that fiber optics be open access. And this picture really illustrates it very well. Our current facilities-based competition in Canada is based on if you want to provide competition, you will have one provider put one road in and another provider put another road in. It doesn't make a lot of sense to put the 401 right next to the 402. Let's have one highway where all the trucks get to drive, and that's really what open access is. And if we fund infrastructure, I went backwards there or forwards there, we will make sure it's open access, and that's a key tenet of our project because we want to make sure that there's competition in the marketplace so that the competition will actually sort out the future for us rather than having the government intervene all the time. Where are we in the project? So this is a big question the councils have. We are currently issuing a request for pre-qualification, or a RFPQ. That is going to hit the market on May 12th. That's just a couple of weeks from now. And what that's going to do is it's going to require the providers to provide SWIFT with the location of all of their fiber optic infrastructure. And the reason that we want to do that is, because Lambton County is a good example. You are a member of the CCLAG group, which is a joint buying group with Chatham-Kent. And you already have a lot of your buildings connected, for instance, to a fiber network that may need a little bit of upgrade, but it's still connected. When you compare that to where I come from in Grey County, we have a lot of work to do to get to where you are today. So the reason that we want to collect the data from the providers is that we don't want to have fiber built where there is already existing fiber. We want to add to the fiber footprint in the region, not duplicate it. So our RFPQ will gather that data. We'll analyze that data, do a construction plan, and then finalize our business case, which we're targeting for about October of this year. When our business case is finalized, it gets a third review by the province, and then we issue RFPs at the beginning of November to actually engage the private sector to build the network. So we won't know the exact plan until we've collected the data, which happens starting in May. And frankly, even once we have the data and have released the RFPs, we don't actually know the dates or the times of the construction until the RFPs have closed and we've awarded them to the providers. And then we will know exactly what it costs, where it's going to be built, and how long it's going to take. So until we have that done in the early 2018, we still don't exactly know where things are going to be built, but we'll follow our guiding principles and make sure that we have equitable delivery of services, that it's open access, et cetera, et cetera. And then the last part that I'll just re-mention to folks is that once our network is operational, the providers will pay back a small portion of their revenues to SWIFT to create this broadband development fund. And that broadband development fund will be used over the years to continue to finish the job until we actually get to our $4 billion number and get everyone connected. The board of directors of SWIFT, one of your councillors, Bev McDougall, is on our board, in fact is the vice chair of the board. You are members of the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus, and you have a majority of the votes on the board. And so that the caucus's reasons for getting involved with SWIFT are going to be followed. We have other municipal members like Niagara and Caledon, then we also have the other users of the network represented on the board as well. That's healthcare, school boards, private sector, First Nations, and we also have an agricultural rep from the OFA to represent the agricultural community. This board of directors has the same as councils have. They have a fiduciary interest or a fiduciary responsibility to the board to make sure that this project is delivered as it was supposed to be delivered and as it was applied for to the province, which is an equitable system that covers all of the 18 partners throughout southwestern Ontario. I do want to just touch on the guiding principles. I'm not going to go into them again, but these are the principles that the board has adopted that most of their decisions are guided by. And number 4 is equitability and ubiquity. One of the questions that we've gotten from staff is, how do we know that Lambton's going to be well taken care of for our $1 million investment? Well, we want to make sure that there's equitable access for folks around the province and an equitable use of the funds that we were given by the federal and provincial governments. So that's one of our key principles. So I can be sure that the board is going to take that very seriously when they make decisions about where the infrastructure should be built. Our timeline, I've left this in the deck so you have the dates of upcoming RFPQs and RFQ releases. These are targets, but we're pretty comfortable with where they are now. Our May 12th date is not likely going to slip, and we think we've left a reasonable time frame for our procurements that we shouldn't have to get pushback from the providers that they will want more time to respond or things like that. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about Jeff Greening from Brook Telecom is going to do a presentation. He shared it with me before today. And one of the things that the providers have always made points with council is we have to deal with the last mile problem. And we totally, completely agree. We have to deal with the last mile problem because we need to get people connected, right? Not just a network built. Well, the way that the local providers have said is, let's just take the money and do last mile. Well, we're actually doing that as well as building the SWIFT network. Now, let me show you this as the slide builds. So this is just an example of an area that has little bits and pieces of fiber in certain areas, and they're connected to schools or they're connected to small villages. And what we're going to do is that we're going to contract with the providers to put these points of presence in, our little SWIFT logos, and we're going to connect those points of presence with SWIFT fiber that the providers are going to own, but we're going to subsidize. Notice that we don't actually go over top of the existing fiber, we connect to it. So we leverage the existing fiber and then we build new fiber. And the fiber that we build has lots of excess capacity. So near the fiber, all the providers can actually connect people to it. That's the goal. We want to get people and businesses connected. And in the short term, some of the wireless providers in the area will connect to the base of the fiber and fill the gaps in with wireless in the short term to get people connected in the short term. So this is what we call the SWIFT effect about how, even though we're building connectivity between points, everything's getting connected between those points at the same time. So this is a sort of overview of the network. You can see we start in Toronto and go all the way to the tip of Tobermory and here down to Windsor and down to Niagara Falls. And we have a core aggregation and access model, which means we have the 401, the county road, and the gravel road. And all of those, you have to build the 401 that connects to the gravel road that connects to the feeder road. And you don't put a driveway every 20 feet on a 401 series. You only get off once in a while. And it's the same design of a network. So how does this, I just wanted to reiterate the point about how we connect people. So here's an example. The two blue boxes, or the three blue boxes, are points of presence, our SWIFT points of presence on the map. We connect those with fiber. And this is an example of a 96-strand piece of fiber. Well, we put a splice point every 1,500 meters in that piece of fiber so that the providers can actually take the fiber out of the sheath and connect it to a small subdivision, connect it to the base of a tower, or connect it to a farm running along the road. This is how we are actually dealing with the last mile fiber while creating a system that is ubiquitous across the whole province. Okay? So we've talked about the Broadband Development Fund before, and our $300 million is just a start. So when the network becomes operational 3.5, 4.5 years from now, the providers start providing services to people, and if we've subsidized them, they will owe us a little residual back. And that residual will grow, and every year the board gets to use the money that gets accrued to keep incenting the providers to build more and more infrastructure. So if we go back to this map, where there's our initial 5-year build, well, over time, we're going to fill in all the empty spaces until those rings that you're so close to the fiber are close enough to connect everybody. That's our model, that we start with pieces of fiber far apart and we fill them in over time with the dollars that are collected from the providers. So that's the fiber diffusion that happens with the SWIFT project. So what can you do to help when we are so we're collecting data from the providers, but we're also going to be collecting data from you, from your economic development departments, from your planning departments. We want to know where your official plan says you should be growing. We want to know where your economic developers are trying to attract particular businesses to a business park so that we can throw that into the model when the board makes decisions about where that first phase gets built, that your local knowledge gets used as part of the data that we collect to make that happen. Okay, so that's an important part. Gathering data, we are going to ask you guys to promote a user survey, and we're going to help over time try to make local permitting requirements easier for the providers, because I'm sure Jeff can attest to that some jurisdictions are easier to build fiber in than others, and sometimes that's our fault as the municipality that creates the barriers for the providers. And if you have any contacts for large multi-site businesses, please do pass them on to us. So you have some concerns that were expressed to us from staff. And one of the questions I got from staff was, well, what's being spent on last mile versus building this super network across the province? So these are just estimates still because we don't have the data back from the providers still, but we have a very solid estimate that's been reviewed multiple times by other consultants and both levels of government. So we estimate that out of $188 million, the $288 million, and that didn't make sense for a second there. Out of our $288 million, about $80 million will be spent on creating those big wires in this diagram, right? So connecting to 151 Front Street down to Windsor, et cetera, et cetera. So once that's done, we should have a balance of about, I'm hitting the wrong button here, we should have a balance of about $180 million to spend on the access component of the network. So we have 18 partners. If we do the math evenly, it'd be about $10 million a county. That will vary slightly depending on size and amount of money that's been contributed, et cetera. Like a Lambton, you're sort of a medium to large size organization versus a Brant that's quite small. So they're going to get less of the money and you'll get slightly more. But again, we won't know exactly what that money, how that's apportioned until we release the RFPs and frankly, until we get the RFPs back and actually have the price back from the private sector. So that's the answer to the how much do you think is going to be spent in Lambton. And I know that we've talked in previous times about a 14-to-1 multiplier. If you invest $1 million, you might get about $14 million worth of return. So that's not necessarily going to all be in the boundaries of Lambton because you're getting a lot of benefit from that $80 million regional access network to get the data from 151 Front Street in Toronto to here. So you're benefiting from it even though it's not necessarily being built within the boundaries of your municipality. And the other question from staff was the open access agreement. How are we going to, what does that look like exactly? Well, this is one of the things that we're collecting data from the providers during our pre-qualification process. We're going to ask them, what are the barriers to you providing open access today? And we'll get a different answer, or achieving open access today. We'll get a different answer from Cogeco than we would get from TechSavvy, because Cogeco is the incumbent and TechSavvy is the non-incumbent. So they will have more barriers as TechSavvy than Cogeco will have as the incumbent provider. Now, what's an interesting thing is we were just in a meeting with Cogeco a couple of weeks ago, and they said, yeah, we're interested in expanding in other territories where we're not the incumbent. So our answer might be different where we're not the incumbent provider. So this is, of course, an internal struggle that every provider has, whether they're an incumbent provider or not. So that's our open access policy. We're going to learn about what that's going to be during our pre-qual, and we will define it when we release our RFP. So that's what our open access policy is going to look like. And again, these are estimates until we've collected the data from the providers. At your next council meeting, I believe, Ron, staff's going to come forward with a report talking about our agreement that we have. You are members of the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus, and the caucus has agreed to do certain things with SWIFT, but SWIFT actually is a separate entity, so we have to have an agreement between us and you, and that agreement is staff is reviewing now and will bring to council's attention forward. And just to remind you of the numbers that you have committed to, in principle, approximately $1 million share of the $18 million. And based on the caucus's motions, et cetera, that's now 3/5 of that is due today. We have the idea of the refundable and non-refundable portion of that contribution to the project. What we're hoping our partners will do is choose not to have the refundable portion back. Here's how it's going to happen. So we're going to build the network. The network's going to get built, and we're going to start collecting these broadband development funds from the providers. We can either use those funds to continue to build fiber or pay back our partners their refundable portions. So if you want this, if you look at this like an economic development project that you want to keep going with all cylinders firing, don't ask for your money back and have us invest it further into your community to keep building fiber. If you have a cash flow problem, which some of the WOW-C partners do, they may ask for their money back. I don't know the specifics of the financial position of Lambton, but our recommendation for all of our partners is to speed the way, to increase the use of our broadband development fund to not ask for your money back. And we give you the option in the agreement to say we don't want our money back now, or we can wait to make that decision 5 years from now. And this is my last slide. Why should you participate in SWIFT versus some other options which may be on the table? We are the only program that's funded with money in the bank today. The federal government has a CTI program that lots of folks are applying for. There's about $500 million for 5 years for all of Canada. We have $180 million just for southwestern Ontario, and it's just a start. So it's very difficult to get that funding. We have a very well thought out plan that has had 2 positive third-party reviews. We have this project has a scale that we can afford to hire the right people to help us advise us to do the right things, because we have a scale to be able to manage that and spread that cost across the whole project. We're sustainable over time because we collect and create this broadband development fund, so we can finish the job without more funding if we don't get it, although we do absolutely want it because it will speed it up. And we're working together as the broader public sector, so we will get better pricing because we're working together. You folks have already figured that out by being part of the CCLAG buying group. SWIFT is really CCLAG on steroids. And lastly, our funding is targeted to improve all areas of Lambton, including Silex and Bell territory. So we are looking at holistically at all regions, not just particular providers' areas. And that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you for that. Councillor Brusewitz.
Thank you, Jeff, for your presentation. I found it really interesting. Also provoking some question on my part. When you were talking about fiber diffusion, you made some comments about proximity to it, how people can connect directly, etc. And of course, the question comes to my mind. How do you deal with optimization of this initial investment? Do you try to hit the area that's going to help the major density of potential customers? Do you try to go to the area that's really hungry for that because there's nothing around? And obviously, if you go to quick payback, with this density population, then of course you can invest in the future. So how do you optimize decision making with this initial building of the fiber network?
That is an excellent question. So the way we're going to do our procurements, our RFPs, is that we are going to put them in geographic zones. So in a very low density area, which we have lots of in southwestern Ontario, including Lambton, even though we have a 66% subsidy, so if a provider builds $1 million of infrastructure, we'll give them $666,000. That still may not be enough in some areas to actually make the business case for the provider to proceed with a particular one-off installation, right? So when we do our procurements, we are going to put them in the size that is reasonable so that a company like Brook Telecom has just as much chance as winning as a Cogeco because we've put it in we've created that RFP zone in the right size that a Brook Telecom can afford to make an application to bid for the money. So in that zone, we will have some high density areas, some very low density areas, and we will also include as much revenue as we can from the public sector so that there is the provider who wins not only gets our subsidy, but also gets to cross-subsidize internally that they've got some low-hanging fruit and some complicated fruit. So we're thinking very carefully about how we're going to do that. And we do need to have some high density because, frankly, we need to put an aggregation point of presence right in the city of Windsor and probably in the city of Sarnia as well, because that's where all the providers meet. So there's going to be some activity there that actually generates a lot of BDF that will help support the rural regions over time.
Any other questions, or do we want to hear from Jeff regarding Brook Telecom? Councillor McGugan.
Thank you, Warden Weaver, members of County Council. Thank you for your presentation. I am fortunate to be one of the where Brook does supply, so I'm very fortunate. A couple questions or comments, I guess. First, you and how many of administration do you have? And do the providers, when this actually gets going, do they pay back to the SWIFT a fee, or where does your salary and wages and all the benefits come from 5 years from now? How's that all work together?
It's a good question. I've been seconded from Gray for a year, so it may not be me 5 years from now, but we'll see where that goes. So the plan currently is that we are a membership-based organization. So the 18 counties, or 15 counties, the WOW-C, plus the Waterloo, Niagara, and Caledon are the initial 18 partners that are providing that $18 million capital fund. And without that, the province wasn't interested in funding us because they wanted to show, they said to us as the municipalities, you have to have some skin in the game for us to give you this money. So that's our skin in the game as the municipal folks, right? So that's that money will be used over the next 5 years to handle we have about 12 people employed right now creating these RFPs and doing outreach, et cetera, right now. And yes, there's an overhead cost to that. So as the project winds down, obviously the number of staff will wind down, and we believe that the membership fees that we charge are, oh, and I didn't finish my train of thought there. So the municipalities have provided the capital. Over time, Lambton will have like a $1,500 a year membership fee. The hospital corporation will have a $2,000 membership fee. And when we aggregate that across the region, we'll have enough revenue from membership fees alone to cover overheads. And the money that's collected through the Broadband Development Fund will be used to incent the providers to build more infrastructure.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Case.
Yes, Mr. Warden, through you to the guest, I'm interested to hear what the just presentation from Brook Telecom, and I may have a question later on for Mr. Hogan. So I'll listen to Jeff, and then we'll go from there. But I may have a question for our guest.
Great. Councillor Marriott.
Thanks, Warden. We were to Jeff. So you talked about the short term with, I think just under 10% of the $4 billion that you'd need. What about the long term? Because originally we heard 2039 before some of the outlying areas are served. So just in case you don't come up with the other $4 billion right away, which I think the feds could if they wanted to, but I can't see them changing the number for a while. But do you have a plan? Like 2039 is a long ways away. I don't know how many people will be alive in this room at that point, but that's a long time for some of those waiting for internet service. But I didn't see anything in that time, in that plan.
So when we've had our sensitivity analysis done by our financial consultants and looked at our potential income from the Broadband Development Fund over time, if we did not get another penny of federal or provincial subsidy, yes, it would take till 2039 to get everyone connected based on the model that we have. We really hope that the federal government steps up to do this, because every program they deliver can be delivered more effectively and more cost effectively if there's broadband at home for people. They can deliver healthcare, they can deliver education, they can deliver other government services. And I'm working with a number of groups and the SWIFT board as well to try and advocate for this kind of funding. If we don't get it, at least we have a plan to get it done. We can't accelerate that. We can't ask the providers to pay a larger BDF because then they will balk at they don't like the idea to start with that they have to give a little bit of money back. If we make it too high to speed up the amount of delivery, it's not going to work. I think Jeff's going to touch on some of the strategies that are potential, and I think his slide deck talks about that it's a chance that municipalities may have to step up here. And I'll give you an example. Here on council, when I was there doing this presentation 3 weeks ago, the local consortium of small incumbent local exchange carriers came to council and said, we have a plan to get all of Huron County connected in 7 years, but it's going to cost $30 million. And we are going to apply for Connect to Innovate funding from the federal government. And we would like you to match that contribution. So we would like you to give us $7 million over 6 to 7 years to help build the infrastructure in Huron County. They, at that meeting, in principle, agreed to do that because they felt it was important enough to spend municipal dollars on broadband, even though it's not a core service that we as municipalities deliver. And they were going to raise the funds by adding a special 2% levy to the tax rate, specifically to fund broadband. And this is not unique because the town of Caledon, who's one of the members of SWIFT, they've already instituted that levy. Theirs is only 0.5%. But the municipalities are starting to recognize that this is a critical piece of infrastructure that we can't wait to have installed over time. My personal feeling is that we shouldn't be paying for this out of property tax dollars. The feds should be really stepping up to this. But I think over time, when I think about how long I've been doing this for 5 years, coming to councils and talking about this project, nobody, I don't think, around this table would disagree that this is an essential infrastructure now for economic development and within the region of Lambton County. And 5 years ago, there were people who were humming and hawing about that. And I think with that pent-up need and how far we are behind all the rest of the partners around the world, that the federal government is going to have to start listening sooner. We're going to fall completely behind.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Boucher?
To be honest with you, I just find this a little bit more complicated for me, but I work with my fellow colleagues from the county to hopefully make it happen. The question I have is, how many companies has the ability to bid for such a project? And could you name some?
So during our pre-qualification process, to be able to bid on our project, if you're a facilities-based provider, which means you all currently provide services in our area, you will need to tell us where your fiber is so that we can make good decisions about where we build more fiber. We don't want to overbuild wherever possible. So we are hoping that there's about 20 to 25 facilities-based providers in southwestern Ontario. Not all of them operate in Lambton County. But we hope to get all of them participating. And even the large ones like Cogeco and Bell have said they're going to participate. And our small incumbents at the beginning said we'll never participate in this project, but we've had a lot of conversations with them, and they are more positive about the project now than they used to be. They still have some fundamental differences of opinion, let's say, on approach. But I think they're going to be in the tent. And maybe Jeff can speak to that when he comes up to speak. So back to your question about who can apply. So the core part of the network, the distributing the data from Toronto out to Barrie and Owen Sound and places like that, there's probably 5 companies that can bid on that piece of the work. And that's probably going to go to one company to do that part. But all the access components, and that's where I talked about that the size and breadth of the size of the RFPs we would release, we're going to probably have between 20 and 30 zones throughout the province, or throughout our region, so that companies like Tucker Smith, Hay, Brook Telecom, Gosfield North can apply for funding and bid for the funding and have just as much chance of winning as someone like a Cogeco and Bell, or maybe even more so depending on how we structure those boundaries, because our objective is to have as much competition as possible on the network. So the more providers that we can have successfully be part of the project, the more successful the project's going to be over time.
You will hang around for more questions, and if we could have Jeff come forward and give us a perspective from local Brook Telecom.
Do I get the presentation up here? Or? Okay. Well, thank you very much for hearing from us. Maybe just a little background on myself. I've worked for Brook Telecom since the tail end of October of this past year. Before that, I worked for Sarnia Lambton Economic Partnership, was heavily involved in the ICF initiative, and woohoo, we won 2 years in a row, top 20. I was pretty happy to see that over the past years. Worked as well in the telecom before that, though, for about 10 years with a little company called People's Telephone. I started up in Forest, Ontario. Ran Excelco Internet, built wireless internet across the county back in those days. And then we were bought by a little company called Am Telecom, which had a much bigger footprint, and then we were bought by Eastlink. So I've worked for the smallest of small and the larger of large, and back to the smallest of small. Jeff was a customer of mine at Eastlink as well, and so I've sold service up in Grey County and Manitoulin Island and a whole bunch of other places around the province. So hopefully I can add some value today to this discussion. So just a little bit about Brook Telecom. If you don't know us, if you're not from Brook-Elphinston area, it's too bad. But anyway, we're a small little internet provider and telephone provider. We started a long time ago, 1911 was our starting point. We serve about 650 square kilometers. And our main central office is located in the town of Inwood, or village of Inwood. And we have 10 remotes scattered around a very, very, very rural area. We are one of probably the smallest local exchange carriers operating in Canada. We're one of 4 ILECs in Lambton County. Hay Communications was up in Grand Bend, Execulink's in the Thedford area, as well as Watford, actually. Eastlink is up in the Forest area and a little bit in Elvinston. That's the former People's Telephone network up there. The next point I've said we were the only cooperative telecommunication company operating in Lambton County. Actually not true. Hay is also a cooperative. I apologize for that. And we have about 1,200 members that we serve. We have 18 employees in our Inwood and surrounding areas. We offer home phone, internet, IPTV, cellular services out of those offices. We have 259 kilometers of rural fiber, plus we have fiber in the villages of Watford, Elvinston, and Inwood. We have 3 retail locations, one in Inwood, one in Watford, one in Petrolia, and we have about 2,500 homes that we pass, and again, it's a very rural area. 65% of our customers that we pass are actually on our fiber infrastructure. That's just over 1,600 customers. The rest are on traditional copper facilities, which have been around for a long time, so that's about 35% of our customers. We are also offering wireless internet. We own 2 cell towers, one outside of Watford, one in Inwood that we actually built from scratch, and we do wireless internet services from there, and we also allow Bell to lease facilities from us on those towers. Funny enough, we're also the Canada Post Office in Inwood. I don't know if you can get more community-based than that. Anyway, and the major centers that we service are Watford, Elvinston, Warwick, and Inwood. And to date, we're debt-free. So we've done all this on generating revenue from our customers and reinvesting it back into our network, which is a really important part of it. So just a brief history. I mean, if you look on the left-hand side, there is the Moormobile that was built in Watford. There's a little bit of history there, and we've got the Galactic on the other side, and that's kind of where we've come from on the internet side at Brook Telecom. 1996 was dial-up, and that's a very short period of time. If you look sort of the difference between those 2 objectives, the Moormobile to the Galactic versus where we've gone from dial-up to now fiber optic. So we've been going along and building fiber. 2000 was when we started our fiber ring in our serving territory, and we rolled out DSL in 2001 on that. We had 100% penetration of DSL in 2003. Which is pretty good, again, for a very rural area. We interconnected up into Grand Bend in 2007. Cellular services were launched, and we did our first rural Watford fiber to the home, and I like to say fiber to the farm, because it is a lot of farms connected out there. In 2008, we started that project, and continued on In 2012, we actually did our first venture into what's called a CLEC. So that's a competitive local exchange carrier. We went into a former Bell territory in Watford and built fiber to the home there in 2013 and completed it the next year. And then in 2015, we went into Elvinston and did the same thing. 2016, we continued working. We worked with the municipality. They were doing a water line project in Inwood, and we did that in 2016, and we're going to continue with that project this year on our own to finish up the rest of that town. 2018, who knows? We're applying for funding like any good provider that's out there right now to see if we can get more funding to build more fiber and connect more rural customers. We're a cooperative. And what does that mean? And I think it's important to our customers. All cooperative members must be customers. So our members are customers. We're obligated to serve them. In fact, actually, the legislation of the Cooperative Act tells us that. We have a board of directors. They must also be members, and they represent the members in all the decisions we make. We don't have a head office in Montreal or Burlington, or it's Inwood. HQ is Inwood. We invest in our community through donations and community involvement. We'll have a team out at the Habitat Home in Watford tomorrow, and we do a bunch of other stuff like that. And we invest in our community through further investment into our network. We take the profits that we make, and last year it was about $900,000, and we plow that all right back into our company and into fiber infrastructure. The rural areas are a huge challenge. We are rural. We know rural, back, forth, frontwards, backwards, everywhere. There's a low housing concentration out there, and that's no surprise to anybody that lives in the area. We have about 1,550 customers spread over 650 kilometers. It's a pretty low density, and it's getting lower. One of the challenges is more older homes are being torn down as farms expand. It makes our job more challenging and all the other utilities out there more challenging. Long driveways are a challenge, believe it or not. Every meter counts. When I go and bid a job, it's every meter I pay for. So the fact that a driveway's 300 feet versus 50 feet makes a big difference in our projects. There's power challenges out there as well, and that's in the homes, equipment getting fried, et cetera. And there's harsh environments. We have barns that are on fiber now. They need that service in those barns. So we are providing that service, but that's a harsher environment for some of our equipment. Not the typical thing that you would find in a residential home in Sarnia. We have a lot of older homes. They're harder to wire. Service call distances are a bit of a challenge. And we have truly very few anchor institutions and mainly small businesses. We don't have a lot of the multi-plant, multi-site businesses in our area. So those are a lot of the challenges that we face. Now, I've taken the opportunity, I've been in this industry for a long time, and I've been on the economic development side, so I've taken a kind of a quick view of a back-of-a-napkin analysis of what it's going to take to do fiber to the home in Lambton County. So I've tried to come up with how many dwellings are out there. And you take a look at the census statistics, there's about, in 2016, just under 60,000 homes. And I kind of ran down the numbers again based on my knowledge of the industry and what I've been doing for the past umpteen years in terms of what potentially are the number of people that are served with a reasonable amount of high-speed internet. Now, I'm not talking fiber in this case. I'm just talking some sort of reasonable internet. And so I've plunked some numbers in and came up with some estimations, and we can debate those numbers back and forth, but for the most part, I come up with close to 15,000 rural homes in Lambton County that need service. They're currently serviced through either maybe a wireless connection, maybe they're not being serviced at all, maybe it's an old DSL connection that's not very good, but about 15,000 homes is my guess in terms of the folks that are looking for a reasonable internet connection. Based on the projects that we do, and this is we've been building fiber for a while and in the rural environment, so we know the numbers fairly well. In an urban environment, the cost isn't too bad. In a rural environment, it gets very expensive very quickly. So conservatively, $8,000 a dwelling is what it would cost in a rural area. More likely, though, depending on what you do, so if you need to go down a country road and pick up one customer, because that happens a lot to us, that adds quite a bit to your cost. And more than likely, we're more like $14,000 a dwelling. So sometimes we might be close to 8, sometimes more 14,000. Take those numbers, multiply them out. I've got a $117 million problem or a $205 million problem in Lambton County. And that's not serving any urban people at all. So that just gives you an idea of the size, I think, and the scope of the project here. So the elephant is Lambton County, and there's been a couple bites out of it. We've taken a chunk off the one side, and as well with our partners or the folks that we work with through the Comcentric Group and the independent telecom companies through Execulink and Eastlink and Hay Communications, we've taken a bit of a bite out of it. But there's a lot yet to happen in Lambton County, as you all can appreciate, I'm sure. What do we need? And I keep harping on this, and I know us independents, we always harp on this, but last mile dollars are really what's required at the end of the day. The federal government needs to provide funding. Provincial government needs to provide funding. They've done some of that through SWIFT. Municipal governments need to step up as well. And I think we've got to be starting to go to our ratepayers for some of these dollars as well. It is a challenge, but that's if the services are required. I think a comment was made in Huron County is some people would rather have fiber down their road than a paved road. And I think that it's starting to come to that now. We also need time. This isn't the sort of thing that's going to happen overnight. It's a big project. And so we need small incremental projects. And what we've done is we've taken our projects and we keep funding it into the next level, right, as a cooperative. So we need to be able to build it, make some revenue out of it, and then be able to fund the next phase. We need municipal support. So we're in this building. Don, I really appreciate, he's one of my greatest cheerleaders out there in Alvinston. I appreciate what he does for us and how he talks about us. And we need that sort of awareness internally within our community, but externally as well. We need to promote the fact that we have connectivity in some of these rural areas. It's very attractive in a town like Alvinston, as an example I use, people moving there saying, wow, I can actually get a decent internet connection. That's beneficial, because I used to be on the economic development side, for attracting residents, and we need to do more of that. Because that helps me. The more residents we get into the community, it helps you as well, the easier the business case is on a lot of these stuff. We need cooperation too. And so one of the challenges too is we need the ability to build fiber in locations that maybe sometimes the road superintendent isn't all that happy about putting it, because it drops our costs quite significantly. So we need to work together. We worked with Alvinston, for instance, on the project in Inwood. They were putting water mains in. We worked with them, saved us a lot of money, quite frankly, and we appreciate that. It drops our costs down, and if we work together on some of these infrastructure projects, it makes a world of difference. We also need to make it attractive for development in the rural areas. I know that's a little bit controversial, but we need more people to live out in the rural areas. It's going to get harder and harder as a utility provider, which I am, to provide services when you get fewer and fewer homes down each country road. So we need to somehow work through that and how we can attract residents and zoning-wise and allow people to develop in some of these rural areas. What are the benefits? One of the things that there's several studies out there, property values actually go up in areas where there's fiber internet infrastructure. So that benefits, I believe, you guys as well. Not only the residents, but it also improves the assessments and therefore the tax base as well. So those are benefits that people don't always look at, but so you're kind of taking municipal dollars sometimes to invest in that future tax dollar that might come. Resident retention is one thing I mentioned as well. Education opportunities. My son is going to high school. There's only so many courses available in his high school in Forest. So I think he's taken his third correspondence course through the Lambton Kent District School Board to be able to take a particular course in preparation for his university studies. That's only the beginning. There's people doing second career stuff. There's people doing degrees from home. It's really important. Employment opportunities. The Marriott Call Center here in town, or in Sarnia, they use remote people to answer the calls when you're reserving your vacation through them. There's somebody in Inwood. That's what their job is. They have access to high-speed internet. They can work there. They have benefits. It's a wonderful opportunity. There's lots of small business opportunities. There's another company in our community, and they have an online store selling hunting gear. And we're also the post office, so we see a lot of shipments going through our office for them. So those are the kinds of opportunities that are out there in the rural areas with high-speed internet. And youth retention is a big issue moving forward. And the whole idea of the gig economy, where people float from job to job to job, is actually feeds right into the infrastructure, the high-speed infrastructure. I've talked about resident attraction already, and they want to be able to work and play in the area where there's fiber. There's families that if you can't get fiber, they can't get Netflix, their kids are not going to be all that happy, let's move elsewhere. So anyway. And we have a lot of agricultural-based businesses that are also demanding this. We have a number of companies that are doing stuff not just in the local agricultural market, but farther afield out in our area, and there's many of those around. But it's basically leading to that sustainable economy out in the rural areas. And the challenge we have in the rural areas is keeping people there, keeping them employed, and keeping businesses going. So my big question to you guys, and I guess to Jeff, and I think he's probably got an answer for this, I hope. There's about 118 CCLAG anchor sites across Lambton County. And that's the analysis I have. They might be off slightly, but I think that's about the right number. The Lambton County being probably actually having the most. And then the Lambton Kent District School Board having the next most number. So how do we take and we build a network to serve those guys and then generate enough funds out of that network? And I think it's about $20 to $30 million to build that network. I've done the business case a couple of times. So how does it generate enough money to build and fund that network plus then the last mile? And that's my question. And again, just my back of the napkin analysis, 117 million, 204 million is the size of the animal. How does enough money come out of that funding to make that happen? So I hope that helps, and I'm open for any questions that you've got. And Mr. Case.
Councillor Case.
Yeah, and again, Jeff, thank you very much for your presentation. It was a good sort of a history lesson at the same time for a lot of us. Just to correct one thing, not to be nitpicky, but it's not the Mormobile, it's the Maxmobile, to keep the historians in Warwick Township happy. They're very particular about that. But I guess my question to you is, a lot of what you told us today is not news to us. We understand that. That's the issues in rural Ontario right now and trying to be sustainable when it comes to funding issues all the way around for municipalities. Question I've got for you, because your predecessor and a few of the other independents didn't support this project previously. In my time on Western Wardens, I mean, they'd come to the meetings and they were very much against this. Mr. Hogan's done a terrific job in trying to, fill all the gaps. I give him a lot of credit. Do you support this project the way it sits now? Because, again, there was lots of talks with the independents about trying to work together to find a way of making this happen. Again, not all municipalities are in the same boat as others. The whole idea is to connect the whole Southwest region. I understand that's the goal. So again, I guess I'm interested to know what your thoughts are on this project. Is it something that we should be putting dollars into? Is there another model that we should be looking at? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but it's very important for us when we try to determine where we put our dollars. So I'll leave you with that, Mr. Warden, to our guest.
So it's a difficult question for me, honestly, having sat on both sides of the plate. I've been very careful with looking at the project plan. I looked at their business case that they put together. I'll be honest with you, I wasn't all that happy. I think it's underfunded, like in terms of what they're looking at. I don't know if it's. I know they've had a couple of experts look at it. I'm very concerned that the dollars are very low in that business case in terms of the amount of cost that it's going to take to roll this out. I would like to see, as a provider, we need more money to make this happen. It's not going to happen just on the backs of our members, because that's just impossible, I think, moving forward to get all of Lambton County serviced in any fashion. So we would be open to working with SWIFT, yes, because I look at it as another funding source. I'm looking at other funding sources. The CRTC has also announced a funding source. We will, for sure, be taking advantage of that. I mentioned CTI. We have put 3 applications into CTI to try and get funding for that. So we are looking for whatever funding opportunities are available to make this happen. The provincial funding has been earmarked to SWIFT, so the Small Communities Fund. Some of the other, like Huron County and some of those, were able to take advantage of the small community funding to build some of their fiber projects in the past little while. So that money has been directed to SWIFT and is no longer available to our folks like myself. So the challenge is does that make, does your spend make sense? And my concern is, and I'm glad to see that there is some mechanism to fund that back into the communities. I still believe that it's not going to be enough to make this work, because I see that there's multiple levels in terms of trying to make the numbers work. So I don't know if that really answers your question.
Yeah, follow up, Mr. Warden, if I could, to our guest. So that's the same kind of discussion that was going on. I've been away now for 3 years from Western Wardens. That was the same kind of discussion was going on. And my challenge back to the independents was, well, then build us a better mousetrap. What can you do in working together to make this happen and make it work? I know it's not easy. We're talking about a lot of territory. Mr. Hogan gave us an example with the maps and so on, what we're looking at. It's a very large project. My biggest concern with this whole thing is the residents of Lambton County that don't have the service now want it, and they want it as quick as possible. And the problem with the pecking order, whatever that'll be, when the RFP is released, and I understand there's a very large area, everybody's going to want action right away. Doesn't matter if I'm in Grey County. If I'm in Grey County, I'm going to want it right away. If I'm in Lambton County, part of St. Clair Township, whatever the case may be, I'm going to want it right away. So I guess my question is, what's the best boom for our buck? You know what I mean? Again, municipalities are in the game now. There's no doubt about it. The funding has been captured from the province, which was a huge win for the SWIFT group. But from my standpoint, we've been very lucky because we've had the investment made by Brook Telecom in our community. We still have some dead areas, as you mentioned. But I mean, what's the best boom for our buck here? Because again, we're putting the money away. Is our best boom for our buck to put into the SWIFT and maybe wait 25 or 30 years before St. Clair Township? I'll use them as an example. Some of their dead spots are looked after. Are we better? Can we make it better and do it? As it was mentioned by Mr. Hogan, Huron County's looking at 7 years to get things struck and put away down there. So not trying to put you on the spot, but at the same time, just questions that I know a lot of us have been thinking about. So I'll leave it at that.
So one of the things that if residents really want to make this happen, and that's what I keep hearing, and I know that that's really the reality around the table is, I think they need to put skin in the game too. When we go and do a gas line project, we expect the residents to kick in money for the gas line. So I think we need to start doing the same thing here, and to spend money elsewhere. I mean, like, it is part of the deal. They're going to have to kick money in. So in terms of what I see as a model moving forward is that there's an investment from the residents, a fairly significant investment, to make that a more palatable business case to serve their particular location. And the investment will be reaped by them through higher property values further down the road and the fact that they can enjoy a service. So I see it as the ratepayers are going to have to come to the table as well in this discussion. There's not enough money in the municipal purse to make it all happen, I don't think. And you've got a lot of other competing projects, such as roads and bridges and other things that you need to invest in as well. But I think the folks that want it, they're going to have to put money in the kitty to make it work.
Any other questions? I understand that there will be a report coming back to us at the next council meeting, kind of a summary of this, and council will have to make a decision whether we go forward or how do we develop into the broadband. Councillor Broad.
Thanks, Warden Weaver. I have a question on the construction side of things. You said $8,000 to $14,000 to put. What percentage of that is actually material versus the dig-in costs? So I'm just thinking in the village of Florence, we're potentially looking at a project. Can I bury in the fiber optics along with that project that we're looking at and maybe not use it for 5 years down the road, but put it in once we got the streets all dug up and everything to start with? So question is, what's the material cost versus the actual dig-in cost on that? And
I apologize, I don't have the exact percentage of it, but my my understanding is I think the number is quite high on the construction side. Going down, and that's why when we do a construction project, we put multiple conduit in the ground at the same time so that we have future-proof for future years. So we continue to do that, and that makes sure that we're able to do that. Another project down the road, if we need to add more fiber or whatever, we're doing that at the same time. So the construction is by far the biggest piece. The more we can bring that down, the better. The fiber itself is, and I'll throw a number out there, $3 to $5 per meter for fiber. But each home needs a vault. They need piping into them, electronics. But the construction by far is the biggest cost of the implementations. I would probably roughly guess around 60 to 70% of that cost is construction costs. Some municipalities in the U.S., again, I was involved in ICF, they actually did what you are mentioning. They went ahead and they built conduit in the ground when they were ripping up the streets. They put multiple conduits in the ground, and they lease the conduit back to the providers if you wish to use it. And so they were proactive in doing that. They were tired of getting their streets ripped up every year for another provider to come in and do a fiber build. And so they actually went ahead and did that. And there might be some models there that maybe make some sense as well. But yeah, the construction's a big cost, and when we worked with Brooke Alvinston in Inwood, it saved us quite a bit of money to do that project while they were working.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McGugan.
Mr. Warden, members of Council, thank you ever so much for your presentation. Councillor Broad has a resident that lives really close to the Brooktown line, and there is high speed within a mile or a little bit more. And I've talked to him several times, and your previous manager there, he got involved, and there was a glitch. We had to get under the Sydenham River and all the rest, so it did not happen. But he's a man at 60 years old. He said, you know, I'm willing to pay $5,000 out of my own pocket if I can get some high speed here. And he is pretty isolated. So I think if we as the county or whoever can sell the idea that this is available, and if people are willing to put money in, they put money in for water lines, they put money in for gas lines, maybe sometimes they aren't happy, but I think we've reached that stage where we have to reach out and people have to start putting something in out of their own pocket. Now, I know they do it through taxes, but I think you mentioned a good point. And just one more comment, maybe Mr. Hogan could comment. When I look at where you are situated, Jeff, and the area you're in, I just don't know how SWIFT can put together an area where there'll be some high density for you to get into, because you're away from high density any way that you go, east, west, north, or south. So maybe Mr. Hogan could comment. I think it's going to be tough for you to pick up a plum.
So I can't speak specifically around the rural nature of this particular area, because I just don't know the area very well, but that's our goal, is to do that. It may be that the density in that rural area is high enough that a 66% subsidy makes sense for the provider. We know that in some areas it's not. So that's our goal, is to do that. One of the things I just want to point out is that SWIFT is not building the network, right? The providers are building the network, and we are subsidizing them to do it. So when SWIFT goes to market in Lambton and Brook Telecom bids and is hopefully a successful bidder, they're the ones who are building the network with our money. That's who's doing it. Now, we're going to have some rules in place to make sure our money's spent well, but that's how the plan is. SWIFT's not building it. It's not the office in Toronto. If Brook Telecom, it's Alveston or Inwood. Inwood is where it's going to be built. So, and sorry, your first part of your question, I didn't think I answered. What was that?
Out the area where it will be tough for Jeff to be able to bid because there's no high density very close to have the impact of subsidizing. I'm afraid he's not going to be able to get any opportunity to bid, and they do excellent work.
So my last comment on that would be, we have been consulting with the community for 5 years, and our leadership as the board level, but also as the WOWC, has made it exceedingly clear that we want to involve the small incumbents. And frankly, I think that the cooperative model is just remarkable because there is no shareholder getting the dollars back. They're just investing back into infrastructure. Really, it's just like SWIFT is. It's a not-for-profit, right? So I actually think that if I had the choice of whether I would choose between Bell or Brook Telecom, I'd pick Brook Telecom because I get local service and all those things if it was my choice. But that's our hope, is that they get involved with SWIFT and they can deliver services to my house because it's an open access network. So that's how it works.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. I think when you mentioned the working together with the road construction and that, we had a report this morning at our morning committee about what's happening with some roads and some drainage and stuff on roads. Maybe there's opportunities from there. I think that needs to be something that is taken into consideration as we go forward with everything, whether it's how we work together. So, thank you for that. We'll have a report coming back and with some options and possibilities. So I would to thank you, and I would ask for a motion from this group to adjourn. Moved by Councillor McDougall, second by Councillor Hand. All in favor of that? That's carried.